this ArtBreak. I'm Christina DeRocher, the director of the museum, and we have 3 artists speaking today. So the first speaker will be Brian Chu. He's a professor of art who teaches painting, drawing, and printmaking. He lives and works locally, and many local landmarks feature in his paintings. He exhibits widely throughout New England and is represented by the Oxbow Gallery in Northampton, Massachusetts. He's the recipient of several distinguished UNH awards, including the Major Grant for International Development and Engagement. He has received several international artist residencies, including the Can Serra International Art Center, Barcelona, Spain, the Alfred Trafford Klotz International Program for Artists, Micah's Artist Residency in Brittany, France, and the Georgian Bay Islands National Park, Ontario, Canada residency. He received both his MFA and BFA from Queen's College, City University of New York, New York. So Brian, welcome. We're delighted to have you here, and I look forward to hearing about your painting. So Brian's work is just around the corner, so you want to move this way, spread out a little bit.
Oh, thank you, Christina, for introducing me. I think I write down a simple note to talk about his work. First, I'd like to begin by who am I? And of course, that's a much difficult question than my work. To begin with, I'm an immigrant. I was born in Taiwan, and it's with a very different education system than the United States. And I immigrated to New York when I was 25. That's impossible, my first identity. I never expect to become an artist until I went to Queen's College. In search for a profession. It was the educator in Queen's College who sort of inspired me and helped me to the pursuit of my career. I have several wonderful teachers from Queen's College, and I still have contact with some of them. Most of them have passed away. For example, Harold Bruder, he's 91 years old, and I learned painting from him. Not only about that, it was also Harold taught me connect with the opera. And Harold also write for Opera Review in New York. And after retire, he's 91 years old. He lives 1 block away from Carnegie Mellon in a simple studio high above there. And he went to an opera almost every week in Met. And he continually painting, 91 years old. We went to see a Titian show in Gardner. He traveled from New York to Boston just to see the Titian show. So that pretty much says so much about Harold. I also learned from many of my wonderful teachers in many different ways. For example, Gabriel Leatherman, and he would call me when I was already, after graduating with a master's degree I live in Georgia at that time. I had a show in New York. He called me and say, congratulate my show, and also talk wonderful, put in wonderful word about one of my paintings. I was a little bit embarrassed, not knowing how to take the credit accomplishment. And I say words, I did my best. And this later part surprised me. and he was a little bit annoyed. Really, actually more than a little bit, pretty annoyed. And he said, Brian, everybody tried their best. And it was a learning experience from my teacher, even after I retired, after I graduated, in a many different ways. I can talk about my teacher, how they taught me in art and also off art. It's very rich experience about my education. Their passion about art, and also, for example, my teacher taught me about pre-Renaissance, how to appreciate Duccio, and in some degree it has less connection to our present world, and also has little to do with our current art scene. It's through their eyes I'm able to connect with some greatest mind in human history. It's just fascinating. That's a part about my teacher, my work. I like to paint. I like to work from observation. In some degree, to me, it's a way to clear my mind, starting from what is the color you see over there. Observing and then develop that notion. But of course, observation is not simple as what you see and copy. It's much more complex than that. And this is my 30 years of painting experience. And the past 10 years, I work mainly on my older work. I find certain issues in the work, I just continually work on them. So my work, for example, when I start a painting, oftentimes it's a color or something interests me. It feels a little bit mysterious. That was the major reason I started. I like to maintain that mysterious quality if I could. For example, a red door. There's a certain red color in the very beginning. For the red slowly finding its a shape, but I will be very careful maintain that mysterious quality instead of let it become a door. So that is my major approach to art. And the art to me is a way to help make sense about this world in many, many ways. And also when I work on my painting, I'm thinking about many great minds in the past. From history and from my contemporary, from my person I know. I love thinking about the great mind, great person who have great accomplishment. In some degree, those things help me form my senses and make sense of basically. That's a major reason I'm interested. So maybe I'll just temporarily end here for the question, and of course there are so many things I can love to share with you. Maybe I'd like to leave some time for For question? Yes, Christine.
Brian, I know we have to move to see the work that's facing this on this
Oh,
picture.
sure,
So maybe
please
you
come
can
over
do
here.
that. So you talked about your desire to paint a scene that has an element of mystery, and yet you revisited this scene several times. And so I'm wondering, what was it about the scene, or was there something that you were still trying to convey in terms of mystery that you weren't able to get the first time, and so you went back to it? Or maybe not at all, maybe it just really appealed to you.
All of these work more than 10 years. And if I bring them back to my studio, and maybe one day I still see the issue, I continue to work on them. I think my senses change, and I'm not particularly proud I have to work on my work so long, and I'm not bragging or anything. It's simply this is something, it's just me. I have to accept that. I like, yeah. And this is out of my studio window. There is a trestle and a tree. In the different time I'm working on this, and there was one period of time I love painting from nature. Out of these, because the cloud change, weather change, everything change. They even cut down the trees, taking down the buildings, and literally. I enjoy that kind of. I literally enjoy that difficulty after a while. In the very beginning, I was frustrated. For example, the painting over there, the trestle, that's 1999, I painted it in Pennsylvania. It was water tower in the distance was a major reason I liked the composition. And I think the third session I went there, they took down the whole tower is gone. And I feel uncomfortable, frustrated, and slowly I learned to accept work with the nature. They're constantly changing. And I have a hard time to dealing with a foreground tree. I don't know how many times I have changed the color. I scrape them down, I sand it down, and also use a palm sander, literally just grind everything down to the lower level. And somehow, I'm looking for a sense of differences that make sense. Hope that's clear? Yes, and there's one time I forgot to mention, I believe, I travel the least. I just want to paint. I don't care what I paint. So just out of my studio window, I work on those work.
Do you ever rework images that, so do you start all your images sort of plein air on site? Do you then ever rework them away from site when you're in your studio?
Yes,
okay.
these are all rework.
Right. And so when you do that, are you working from any photographs, or are you working just sort of from memory? And
I also have a pretty bad vision. Yes, I have a very bad visual memory. Some of my artist friends have incredible visual memory. I don't. I think at that time is a color relationship. To some degree, I was describing, I'm interested in the objectiveness, and I'm also interested in subjectiveness. How these two combine. to a degree, when I work in my studio, it's color that do the more talking. Although the imagery is generally over there, but in my interest is not to let the image dominate my thinking. To another degree, I need to find a way to open it up. It's between the open and close in the more abstract way of saying, constructing the scene.
And with the figures in your scenes, are those usually additions versus something that you actually saw on site?
Depends. The guy with the yellow shirts, actually he is a chef in the Indian and Delight restaurant, and he's very nice. Give me soda. Let me use bathroom. Yeah, this is a part for a landscape painter. You need to figure out where is your bathroom first. Painting on the street is fascinating, interesting. You meet people. When I paint a different cultural background, the interaction with people is so different. Some excellent, some strange. When I was working a nice scene over there, right in front of the Indian restaurant, some teenager, when I was talking to another artist friend, came over, paint a big heart on my canvas to show her appreciation of my painting. It says so much about something about this world. So they are wonderful things too.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Brian. Next, we'll hear from Megan Sampson, and her ceramic pieces are to your right. Move this way. It's not turning. Megan Sampson received her BFA in clay and sculpture from the University of New Hampshire in 2005, and 10 years later, in 2015, she received her MFA from Boston University. She has been awarded many academic scholarships, including the Boston University Women's Council Graduate Scholarship and the Konstantin Alajalov Scholarship. Megan has also worked as a clay studio assistant at Odyssey Clayworks in Asheville, North Carolina, and has attended many residency and workshop programs, including Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts, College of the Atlantic, and the Anderson Ranch Arts Center. She is currently an adjunct professor of ceramics at the University of New Hampshire and teaches and works out of her studio Mud City Clay in Rochester, New Hampshire. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice. So it's hard to start one of these. I think I want to start with talking about drawing. I think that many years ago, when I was a small child, drawing was the beginning of my relationship with art. It really is the beginning. It's like it's like the first moments that I felt free and connected, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, I can draw on this wall, and it was like the most liberating experience of my life. And I think that from that point on, drawing has just become such a huge part of my art experience. And it's one of those things that it feels like I can make something that looks, abstract or realistic. It's like I can use many tools to draw, and it was just like this relationship with drawing kind of carried me through into my teens, this love and appreciation of art. And when I was in high school, I was introduced to clay, and I think that those first moments of touching clay, I had this really great high school art teacher, and she had a ceramic studio that was really open, and it wasn't just about throwing on the wheel, but we also did all kinds of crazy projects. Like I remember from being like 15 years old and making these little tiny trompe l'oeil clay foods, like miniatures, and like making these little like kitchen sets and like this little scene. And it was like all of a sudden I felt like the drawing, for me, it was manifested through clay in a way that like all of a sudden my drawings, from my imagination, like that direct portal from my mind to the paper could all of a sudden be out of clay. It was like the clay had the same sort of properties and approaches as the drawing did for me, where I could make anything. I could make anything out of clay. I could make it look realistic. I could make it look organic. I could make it, it was like all of a sudden it opened up for me, and thus it was like it's been a 20-year obsession with making sculptures with ceramics, and like I think that my early work in clay, I always was connected with drawing, because I make my work like I would make a drawing. Like I start and I don't really have a huge plan in my head. I'll just start making, and it comes to me, and it adds up, and then I edit, and then I take away, I cut up, I add to it. I draw with tools, my fingers, and I'm really interested in like clay as the material that should just be manipulated, and you can see the process almost like you can see in some drawings, like building up the surface and like creating the forms, and I don't know. I think it was about 10 years ago, right before graduate school, where I started to realize that the content of my work, the things that I was interested in, were always stories and telling stories and like a highly narrative sort of approach to my work. And I thought before then I was more abstract. Like I definitely wasn't really specific about the sculptures being figurative, but they kind of were always figurative. They were always sort of about me, and they always had some sort of self-portraiture in the intention of making them. But it was about, like I said, about right before graduate school, I kind of thought, well, what happens if I start to like really bring the body into the work in a more specific way? And I think it was really important for me to make that distinction, to start recognizing that actual body, like recognizable bodily features like eyes and nose and mouth, and to like start adding these to the work totally changed my relationship with my work, and it changed the relationship with the people who were interacting with it, and it became kind of this thing I'd always felt the work had, but it didn't have it until this point where it was all part of a big story. It was all connected with like me as a center and this like kind of world that I was trying to create. But all of a sudden, like using the figure in a new way for me was like familial. Like all of a sudden they like became real characters in this larger narrative. And and from that point on, I started making these bodies of work that I call ceramic heads. And each body of work was really kind of like this intricate like performance of all these different characters that had to do with self-portrait, like me, but they were like maybe a memory that I was like working through, or an emotion or a feeling, or a major life event, and they were like these series. So I've been working on several of them now, and this series, so let's fast forward to 2019. This series of work that you're seeing is part of a larger collection that's called Mother Dirt. They're self-portrait clay heads that I created for a solo show in Kittery at the Bowie Gallery while I was pregnant with my son. And inherently the work was about growing a human being and carrying a child. And while the work always had, these ideas of personal experience, this work was really about identity and really like trying to figure out who this mystery person would be and who I was going to be, and you know, all the changes that were occurring in our lives during that time. So that was called Mother Dirt, and these are some of the pieces that are in it. So I want to talk a little bit, real quick, briefly about these faceplates is what I call these. It was much to do like about drawing that I was talking about earlier. You know, always having that desire to recreate drawings out of clay, really. That sort of feeling of inhibition and activity and just sort of, you know, as the pieces manifest as they're being made. I had a lot of limitations that summer while I was growing a human, and I had all these slabs that I had rolled out, so we roll out these clay slabs, and they dried out a little bit too much, which, you know, clay has a lot of limitations, which I mostly celebrate, and I let the clay be what it needs to be. I don't get overly concerned with too much of cracking and breaking. I kind of let it be part of the story, but these slabs got really dry, and I was lazy, and I didn't want to. I wanted to just draw some ideas I had in my head, so I started drawing on these slabs of clay with underglaze, which is like a pigmented clay that adds color, and drawing and carving, and just drawing right into the slabs, and then crudely cutting them out. And of course, you know, that's when the gallery comes to the studio and is like, these are amazing, and I'm like, these are just sketches, you know, and so, but through that encouragement, I've started making these faceplates, and they've become really this new approach to the clay work. While they're still three-dimensional, and I can still feel as a part of like the network and the little families that I'm creating with the clay sculpture, they become like these more directed portraits that you can actually walk up to and like look at. And I feel like the engagement with them is different for the viewer and myself. So just a funny little side story about how sometimes the work that we make in between the work that we make is really important. So yeah, I make clay drawings that I call self-portraits. So does anybody have any questions about the work?
What are some of the traditions of ceramics that you feel particularly aligned with?
The traditions that I feel most connected to are form. I think that and you can see it maybe with these two pieces and some of the bust work. I think that there is like these inherent images that we have in our minds when we think about what a ceramic vessel looks like, and I'm kind of interested in that form and shape as like just a shape because it mimics the body. It is so familiar to people that I like that connection, and I think that it's so loaded with the history of our of people, because the first things that we made these utilitarian objects out of clay. We also made figurative sculptures a long time ago, so like I think that there's a connection with the figure, the tradition of the figure, and the tradition with the forms, those sort of vessel forms that I sometimes they eke in to the work. Like I might start with the vessel form and it becomes the body, so that's one tradition that I feel like really resonates. I also just love the tradition and the history of firing clay. Like I think that there is something so cool about making something, taking dirt and soft mud, and then it having this like great transformation in the kiln, and the different types of firing. And I think that all of that is really exciting, and I like to kind of play around with different types of firings and different traditional firing methods while making abstracted contemporary sculpture out of clay. I'm not a huge glaze. Glaze doesn't come into my work all that much. I'm more interested in pigments and maybe some, some of the shininess, but I always try to have a little bit of a balance. I see it more as a graphic thing rather than the glaze and I, we've had a long history of just kind of being like the glaze it's like people want to see glazed ceramics, and it's really tough with sculpture because I don't always want to put it on there, but sometimes it works, and yeah. Does that answer your question?
Megan, can you talk a little bit about your own sort of personal approach to ceramics and how that influences your practice as an instructor?
What do you mean,
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about how you were influenced by what you were making in the project
Yeah.
that you made in high school and that lasting impression. So what is it about your philosophy and how do you try to apply that with your
my
students?
students? So it's, I've been teaching for a long time now, and I have been teaching clay for just as long as I've been teaching art, and I think that a lot of the influences do come from early experiences in like an academic setting, where I feel like when I was in school here and when I was in high school, I had a lot of different voices and I had a lot of different approaches, and the ones that I was most drawn to and most influenced by myself were kind of these larger parameters and sort of approaches where you had sort of a little bit of an idea and a technique and a method, and then you can kind of interpret that in however way that you want as a student. And I think that that's how I've always taught. I've always been very interested in my students exploring their own personal artistic voice, because I think it was really important for me to have those freedoms as an artist. I mean, I've always been interested in making art that is meaningful to me. And when you go to school, they're like, well, you also have to learn this, this, and this. And it's always been this love-hate relationship, but so important. And I love those challenges from my teachers. And so I give that. I push it. I give that too. So it's a balance. But I'm definitely interested in my students finding their expression through the material for sure. But also, I have a huge respect for the history of ceramics, and I teach that. I teach that history because I wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for everything that came before, and that's important to the curriculum too. So, yeah.
This sort of maybe leads off of that question a little bit. I think it takes a lot of courage for an artist who is trained, very trained artist. You have the FA, you have the MFA, to relinquish enough of that to create work that looks as kind of immediate and raw. And I don't want this to sound as a criticism, but there's an immediacy to how you're creating and making that feels a lot more like the life that comes out of what we used to call outsider artists or naive artists or untrained artists. And they did that because that's the resources that they did or didn't have. Right. They were just creating. I find that kind of life to be harder for somebody who has been so educated. Yeah. Was that a struggle for you to sort of move from creating work that everybody was like, oh, look how sort of cultivated or how learned that piece looks, into something that feels much more like a raw expression?
I think it was a struggle. Yeah, it was a struggle academically for sure. But I think that what happens is it was like a multitude of always kind of trying to do this and being interested in this, and also being trained to really, to make, to use materials in really amazing ways. And I think that what happens, especially in an MFA program, is it's like this huge explosion where it's just like, oh my gosh, you feel all the worlds colliding. And I think that kind of happened to me at the U, and very soon, right away, within the first semester, fantastic critique. But I was sort of performing in a way, and I knew that. and like I went home for that break, and I was like, I thought about it, and I felt like, what is your truth, and that is like a big question, like what is my truth? My truth is to work quick and messy, and to get my ideas out quick, and to make a lot of work, and to use the clay with reckless abandonment, and have joy when I make it. Like I was thinking too much. I was overthinking, and I was feeling very, it was like I just didn't feel like, I think truth is a really good word to describe it. It was like when I made my first, and I've made work like this along the way, and then all of a sudden it was like I made this clay head. Like I just remember making this clay head, and its mouth was open, like this huge open mouth, and it was looking up, and I was just like, I know you. I was like, I know you. Like you are, I know you, and I need to make more of you. And so that was what happened. And so then I just kind of pushed it aside, and it's a lot of negotiating. It's a lot of more education, because I was forced to then understand where my imagery was coming from. Like, why did people always have that evocative, like be like, oh, this reminds me of this, and this. So I had to figure out what that meant to me, and like how I fit into that, And a lot of it is just my inner truth, and maybe I had to unlearn some of the stuff that I once learned, but it's just, and it's going to happen again, I'm sure. It's like, it's not over, I can tell, but yeah, it was a struggle, but I'm tough. Art school does that. It makes it pretty tough. Anybody else have any questions?
Well, we have time for one more speaker. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you guys.
I really